When the righteous cry out for help, God hears and rescues them from all their troubles. God is close to the brokenhearted. When the righteous cry out for help, God hears and rescues them from all their troubles. God is close to the brokenhearted. In a year filled with broken hearts, filled with the cries of the innocent and the weeping of the righteous, these words from the Psalms bring us comfort. God hears our cries. God is close to the brokenhearted. A little less than 3 months ago, ProPublica released an audio recording that changed the course of our nation's immigration policy. The tape, recorded by a whistleblower, contains the sounds of 10 children from Central America who had just been separated from their parents. They call out "Daddy" and "Mommy" over and over in Spanish. Other kids are sobbing so hard, it sounds like they're gasping for air. According to court filings, the government separated over 2,600 children from their parents after crossing the U.S. border as part of its family separation policy. 2,600 children, 2,600 boys and girls. We only heard 10 of them, so we can only imagine the despair, the fear, the cries of the hundreds and hundreds of others. Even though activists and advocates have been working to change this policy for months with little success, once the world could actually hear the children's cries, everything changed. Prominent politicians on both sides of the aisle came out en masse against the policy. Just 2 days later, just 2 days after the tape was released, immense public pressure forced the president to end the family separation policy. The world heard those children's cries, and the world listened. In the words of the Psalms, when the righteous cry out for help, God hears and rescues them from all their troubles. God is close to the brokenhearted. Tomorrow morning, in our Torah reading, we will again hear about crying parents and children. The Torah portion, though, is actually best known for the opposite. For Sarah's surprised joy and joyous laughter after she gives birth to Isaac at the young age of 90. But the joy of Isaac's birth overshadows another parallel story, one of deep pain. Here's the backstory. For many years, Sarah, Abraham's wife, couldn't conceive. And in order that Abraham could have a son, Sarah told Abraham to take Hagar, her slave, and have a child with her. And that's Ishmael. God made a promise to Sarah that one day Sarah would be able to conceive a child of her own. In our Torah portion, God makes good on that promise. But soon after the joy of Isaac's birth, Sarah notices Ishmael playing nearby. In that moment, it hits her that there could be problems for her baby Isaac if he grows up alongside Ishmael. The Torah explains that Sarah doesn't want Isaac to have to share his inheritance with the son of a slave. Other sources say that Sarah thought Ishmael would be a bad influence on Isaac, or maybe even that Isaac would pose a threat, that Ishmael would pose a threat to Isaac's life. Either way, Sarah orders Abraham to expel Hagar and Ishmael from their household. At first, Abraham objects, but then God tells him to do as Sarah wants. So Abraham eventually sends out Ishmael and Hagar with only a little bit of water and some bread for their journey. When their water runs dry, the Torah shows us that horrid moment when Hagar realizes her son isn't going to make it. The Torah reads, quote, "She left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance. For she thought, 'Let me not look on as the child dies.' And thus sitting afar, she burst into tears." A mother and son, fleeing an unsafe home, short on water and in search of a better life. Surely, as we read their story this Rosh Hashanah, in America in 2018, Hagar is not just Hagar, and Ishmael is not just Ishmael. Theirs is a universal human story, and Hagar is every mother, every parent who has ever despaired over the fate of her child. But in an instant, Ishmael's fortunes change. The Torah continues. God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy." Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled her skin with water. The skin's like an old water bottle. And she let the boy drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. Hagar was weeping. Ishmael was too. Once again, in the words of the Psalms, when the righteous cry out for help, God hears and rescues them from all their troubles. God is close to the brokenhearted. God hears the crying of parents because God too is a parent. Throughout Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we sing many times, Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu, our parent. Malkeinu, our majestic ruler. We call out to God as a child will call out to its own mother or father, hoping that God hears our cries. And in fact, on Rosh Hashanah, it's actually a tradition to cry to God. Some rabbinic sources should say we should actually cry, that we should literally shed tears. But few communities actually do that today. In place of actual weeping, the rabbis envisioned the shrill, piercing blast of the shofar as the embodiment of our cries. Our inner bellows propelled directly to the heavens. Rabbi Aaron Goldscheider explains that, quote, "When we hear the shofar blasts, they are not to be heard merely as blasts of a horn. They are a cry to God. On Rosh Hashanah, the shofar teems with many tears. We cry to God on this day." End quote. In fact, Rosh Hashanah was not the original name of today's holiday. In the Torah, today's holiday was called Yom Teruah, literally the day of calling out. But in other translations, the day of whimpering, or the day of crying out. You might recognize that word, the word truah, as one of the three calls for the shofar. The rabbis of the Talmud explain that each of the different sounds of the shofar have different meanings, different emotions that we want to express to God. The Ben Ish Chai, a medieval compendium of Jewish law, explains the shofar calls as follows. The continuous and smooth sound of the first call, tekiah, is reminiscent of pure joy and goodness. And as you probably all know, tekiah is also the last call of the shofar service. The tekiah gedolah, the great tekiah. Through this long, steady shofar note, we proclaim the joy of the day, the joy of having lived one more year. But in between those two happy tekiah notes are deep, almost primal cries to God. The next call is shivarim, which comes from the Hebrew root shin bet resh, literally meaning broken or shattered. The Talmud describes these three long notes as sobs, representing pain and suffering, even comparing it to the deep, broken sighs of a mother who has just realized her son isn't going to be returning home from battle. If you heard the recording of those children from the detention center, you know exactly what the rabbis were talking about. Shivarim is the whimper of mother and child who have been forced apart, who have escaped or been expelled from a troubled home, whose cries reach God, no matter how shattered, how splintered, or how soft. Shivarim is our collective call of trauma, of brokenness, of loss. The last shofar call, Truah, our holiday's original namesake, is also a cry, but a cry of a different sort. Rabbi Dov Berwine explains that Truah, quote, is also, like shivarim, a wail of mourning. But in another context, it can be a call to arms, a rallying sound for a charge to be mounted against a foe. Truah is the call that roused the hearts of the ancient Israelites entering battle. Today, it stirs the heart of every Jew who hears the cries of little children and knows that something must be done. It's a call to action, a cry, but a rallying cry. On Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Truah, as we cry out with joy for another year of life and blessing, our tradition insists that we not forget the cries of others near and far who are still suffering. In those cries, we hear a call to help, to act, to stand with those who need us most. In the words of Edmund Flegg, a French Jewish writer, whenever the cry of despair is heard, the Jew hopes. Our hope is rooted in our history, in our memory, in our holy texts. In the words of Psalm 34, when the righteous cry out for help, God hears and rescues them from all their troubles. God is close to the brokenhearted. Ishmael cried out, and God offered him God's presence. Ishmael grew up, his descendants thrived, and God made them a great nation. The children and the parents on the border cried out. Thousands of volunteers, thousands of regular people heard their cries. They donated their time and their money to help right this wrong. Whistleblowers, immigration attorneys, civil rights groups, rabbis, and other clergy, they all heard the cries and sprang into action. Of the 2,600 children who were separated from their parents, more than 2,100 have been reunited with their families. 2,100 lives put back together. 2,100 traumas have begun the process of becoming whole once more. Thousands of people banded together to create this tremendous human victory. But almost 500 children are still separated from their families. 22 under the age of 5. We pray that, like in our psalm, God will hear their cries, that God will be with them, that God will rescue them. But we can do more. We can offer more than prayer alone. Rabbi Richard Levy, a former dean of my rabbinical school, comments on our psalm, on Psalm 34. He says, quote, "While waiting for God's rescue from our own troubles, the more we act in a godly way to others, the more we will grow into a refuge for them. A refuge big enough to harbor us as well." So this Rosh Hashanah, this Yom Teruah, on this day of crying out, may we act godly. May we learn how to be close to the brokenhearted. May we hear their cries. May we offer them our presence. Through the call of the Teruah, may we turn their cries into our rallying cry. Let us rise up and show the brokenhearted they are not alone. Shana Tova and Gamar Chatima Tova. Happy New Year, and may we all be sealed in the book of life.
Amen.